I've been working on the Marshall Ashcroft miniature, kind of in the background between commissions. And I was wanting to have an executioner sword ever since I played Vermintide 2 and Mordhau. I always thought that'd be a really cool sword for a Marshall to have, just a really big, imposing weapon. And then when Games Workshop came out with their new Chaplain, I thought, man, now I really have to. It just looks so cool. So that's what we're going to be doing. I've got a concept sketch here, and I'm going to be making 3 different swords. I've already made one, and we're going to be making another one here. This is kind of what we're going to be doing, but instead of sculpting the cross here at the distal end here, we're going to be doing something else, which I'll show you in a second. But to start with a concept, history has a lot of inspiration to offer. If you're looking for ideas for weapons and armor, obviously history would be an excellent resource. If you want to have a historical basis, a lot of the design is already done for you. Now, the executioner sword is not terribly common. They're fairly rare, though they did exist. They were used for executions, and they were symbols of judicial power. Now, the other aspects of them are sort of up for debate on how or the why, but there are some aspects that we will be able to use in our own design. Now, the executioner swords generally had a very imposing, very purpose-built blade, very square, okay, with a squared off or rounded distal end, the tip. And historians debate on why, whether it's just to increase cutting power or to show that this isn't a weapon of war. It's a purpose-designed symbol of judicial power, and so there's no thrusting. For whatever reason, this isn't a sword designed for combat or for any kind of technique. It's designed for a singular purpose. For our purpose, it's going to look really cool. It also is a great place to start learning how to build weapons because of the straight lines. You don't have to worry about curves. You don't have to worry about tapers or anything like that. So this should be pretty simple. I'll show you how to make the blade and the tang, and then in the following episode we'll go over green stuffing, the details, and all of that. A lot of the executioner blades had cutouts in the tip, and that's what we're going to be doing. Instead of just sculpting a cross there, we're going to be adding some cutouts, which I've done in this one. But the one we're going to be doing are going to be just holes. There are historical surviving examples that show this was done, and for a lot of theoretical reasons. For our purposes, it's just going to look cool. We're going to do four holes so that it kind of resembles the cross, and then we'll finish the blade after we start the cutouts. All right, so what we're going to do first is, once we have our concept, we need to pick our scale. For our scale, and let me bring you in a little bit closer here, and we'll get rid of the concept. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is get our materials. So we've got some Plasticard, and I am really running out of this stuff, so I have to order some more. And the link I'll post in the description so you guys can get some too. This is, I think, 3 mil thick Plasticard. You can get it on Amazon. Now we need to get our scale, and you need to start with the miniature you're going to be using, who's going to have the weapon. Then it's easiest to just find a weapon that already exists and see if that looks right. For a while, I was going to use this sword from Conversion World, and then I decided, no, I definitely need to do an executioner sword. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do, once we have our concept and our scale piece, is to get a piece of Plasticard that will fit our blade. And this one won't have quite enough for a full tang, but that won't matter. We'll fix that when we get to the hilt. This should be enough for our blade, though. And I'm running out of Plasticard, so I'm really hoping that this is enough. But what we're going to do is sketch out with a ruler our blade shape according to our concept. that we drew. And if you've ever watched real sword making, this is going to be similar in many ways. Let's see, so let's say we go right like that, and you can get real technical and measure the two ends if you want. Those are both half. Yeah, that's pretty close. With all the sanding you're going to be doing later, it doesn't need to be quite exact yet. Let's say that this is our end here. We're going to just round it off. Okay, so now we have a good executioner blade. Now, one of the reasons that I wanted to do little cutouts, like we'll see in historical examples, so let's say that we do one here, 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 and here, is because this allows us to talk about a very important thing, and that is, if you're going to be removing any material from the inside of the blade, leave the blade in the host material. So, for example, if you were going to be doing a blade here, don't cut out this outside line yet and then do the cutouts. Do all the cutouts, all that detail, and then remove it from the host material. Okay. Reason for that is when you're cutting and you're doing any kind of stock removal, this stuff out here will add rigidity to the blade. If you were to remove it and have the blade, and then you do your edge bevels and everything else, and then you do your holes and you screw them up, well, then everything is messed up, and there's not a whole lot you can do about that. However, if you work on your stock removal first and it screws up, you can kind of compensate for that. And then I'll show you how to do that. The other thing is if you're doing stock removal, you're going to have a lot of really thin areas here and here and here that could break and twist and bend while you're trying to work on it. So it's best to leave that removal until you've done everything on the inside. Okay, so when we're drilling and cutting, a lot of times things end up crooked, right? So we would like to have these nice and even. However, if we drill this and it ends up that they are crooked, what we can do is flip this over and redraw our outline to be squared up with our holes. So let's say our holes end up being like this. I wish we had a larger piece, but then we could cut it out accordingly. Does that make sense? Which is what happened with this piece. What happened was I cut these out and they ended up being a little bit more crooked than what my outline was. I had a lot more material to work with, and all I did was erase my outline and redrew it squared up with my cutouts, and it fixed it fine. Because we don't have a lot of material here, I'm really hoping that this doesn't get screwed up, but we will see. We're going to be using a X-Acto blade, and we're going to drill like we were about to do a pin. If you haven't seen a pin video, go watch that one. Okay. Actually, let's use a tip with a nice point to it. All right. We're just going to get right in the center of where we want them and do a little pilot hole, and make sure you cut straight up as possible. You want this spine of the blade to be vertical, like this. Just watch it as it's spinning. Don't let it do this, don't let it do that. Okay? That will really help you drill a nice straight hole. Okay? Let's go on to the next one. Okay, those are looking pretty good. And again, if we were doing crosses, we were doing lettering, whatever, and we're cutting it out, leave it like this first so that you have nice stabilized material. Okay. Those look really good. And I am pretty relieved. Again, if these had been crooked, and let's say that the holes had been like this and we had more material, well then we would just redraw the lines accordingly, right? Does that make sense? Hope so. Okay, so now that we have the holes drilled on one side, we need to equalize them on the other side. Okay? And you want to do this gently and carefully, looking back over both sides, so that you don't start to drift one way or another. In fact, I'm going to make the holes on this side a little bit more pronounced. Another reason I like using the blade for this is because it adds some dimension to the holes. Instead of the holes just being straight holes, they have kind of a cone because the blade creates a cone, so the outside of the hole is much bigger and then it shrinks in the center and then comes back out like this on the other side, so it just adds some cool dimension to it, a little bit more detail and interest in your blade. You know what I mean? Just like that. Okay, now we have some good looking holes. Now if we were doing any other lettering with green stuff, so we're not cutting out but we're adding to the blade, you want to do that after you cut these out. Okay, now what we're going to do now is we're going to cut these out with the assistance of the ruler. The reason we're using a ruler and not scissors is because scissors will actually bend the material. So as you're cutting, it tends to bend the Plasticard into a shape, and then it's not going to be nice and straight anymore. It's going to be bent, right? So what we're going to do is trim with the assistance of our ruler, and you want to be nice and careful, especially if you are running out of material like me and there's not a whole lot left to hold on to. I want to do gentle cuts. Don't push too hard. Don't shift the knife, because if you go out like this, then you're going to carve a line like this. You could also bend it or break the very, very fine tip of your knife. So do lots of cuts until it gets nice and deep. Cut all the way around the outside. Alright, see that? Now we've got the edges cut. Now to do the top, you don't really need to do a curve like that. Cutting with this thick material multiple times with an X-Acto takes a lot of practice. It's easier if you just do some lines like this. Matter of fact, I kind of like that pseudo point, or rather just a little bit of a point. It's kind of cool. But anyway, if you like it one way, curved, you can curve it off now with sandpaper or file, or just leave it like that. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to refine this a little bit and sand down the edges. What you want to do is get a sheet of sandpaper. This is 320 grit, so it's pretty fine. However, it will still leave scratches in the surface, in the face of your material. So you don't want to use it on the face and then not use a finer grit. You want to use like 600 or something. If you scratch this up with sandpaper, when you go to paint it, it is going to look kind of rough. So this is just for cleaning up the edges. Okay, so keep it nice and flat. You could also wrap this around a wood block and make some sanding blocks if you wanted to. But if you keep it flat on your table, it should be fine. You're just going to do some really easy, nice, flat, even sands. And don't do this, because as you're doing that, your hand will tend to rock back and forth, and then you will get an uneven plane. Okay, so freeze your hand in place. Just kind of sand it nice and straight. I'm going to clean up that edge. You want to check both sides, because sometimes one side will look more even than the other, or because you've been drawing on this side, it'll trick your eye thinking that this side is nice and even because there's a line there, when the actual line is a bit further out. And I can see that there's more material on this side than this side, so I'm going to sand this side down a little bit. See what happens when you take material out. It always ends up a little bit crooked, and you need to compensate by shaping the outside of the material. It's getting pretty good. I'm going to shape that a little bit more, because I want kind of a pseudo point. I think that'll look cool. Maybe I'll change it later. We'll see. Now, after we have equalized both sides, we need to work on the edge bevels. In other words, make it look like it's sharp. Okay, and all we're going to do is take our ruler, and we're going to put it at a degree so that it's crooked, so that it's like this, and then we're going to skate it across the sandpaper. Now, two things. The ruler that you use has to have a angle downward on the edge, and then you also don't need to worry about getting this too clean. All we're trying to do is establish some grinds or some edge bevels, and then we'll clean it up with the file. Okay, what that's going to look like is, let's get some of this dust out of here. You're going to put it flat, lay it like that. Okay, and then you're going to gently just skate it. You skate it whichever way does a nice clean stroke instead of it shuddering like that. Sometimes it's easier to go toward yourself like this. Get more control. Just like sharpening a knife or a tool, you want consistent edge. Okay? And do this on all four sides. Okay? Do this nice and consistent. The more consistent you are, the more it will create a nice flat that we can then clean up and define with our file. So I'm going to do that to this guy, and I will be right back. Okay, now I have the sides beveled. And we kind of have a design choice to make now. Do I sharpen the top here, the arch, or do I leave that blunt to kind of reinforce the idea that this isn't a thrust-centric weapon, that this is for chopping only? I did bevel this one, so you can kind of see that one's beveled. You know what? Let me show you how to do that in case you decide to. With this one, we'll just go over the lines I've already done. What you're going to do is you're going to, as you're moving along, you're going to be turning it in your hand. So you're going to be doing this. So you're kind of doing like a window or a windshield wiper kind of thing. So just do an arch. I'm going to show you on this one, even though I'm going to keep that one without that bevel, because I think it looks cool. Just a little bit of variety between these two, you know. Anyway, that's how you would do that. Let's move on. Now that this is all beveled, what we're going to do is clean up the edges with our file. Hold this at an angle like that, and then find your bevel with the file, okay? So you want the file to be riding on that edge, that angle that we created. And if there are any areas that look like they're too thin or that need to be evened out, all you do is just skate your file nice and easy. Cross it like that, okay? This one looks pretty good. The more consistent you are and the straighter you cut the blade, the easier it is to have really even bevels. If you just can't see them, if you're just having a hard time actually seeing the bevels, what you can do is spray paint this thing black, then sand in your bevels, and then finish with your file, because then the top part here will be black and the sides will be white, and then that contrast will help you pick out how you're doing. My lighting setup right here, I'm actually able to see it without the paint, but that's just an idea if you're having a hard time seeing it. Okay, so that looks good there. I think that I'm actually pretty happy with these bevels. No, I'm not. That one needs to be really defined. Don't push too hard with this, because you'll bend the blade, and then you'll have scalloped bevels instead of nice straight bevels. Matter of fact, that one needs another couple passes on the ruler. I'm going to do that, and then we'll be right back. Now it's time to cut out the tang. What we're going to do is get our scale piece here, because we probably would have lost the line in all of that sanding. Okay. And just make a little mark. Doesn't need to be exact. You can always sand or add a little bit more grip or whatever else, but leave yourself some room if you're in doubt. So maybe cut the blade a little bit longer or whatever, just so you can remove some material if you don't like it one way or the other. Okay. So now that this is, ooh, that's actually kind of sharp. All right. Okay. So now we're just going to cut a little bit off of the grip. For this, what I'm going to be doing is, especially if we were adding a fuller to this, what I'm going to do is draw a line squared up
with these two holes. Draw that. That should give us our center line, okay? Because we want to take away an equal amount of material from this side as we do from this side, and this center line will help us do that. Okay? So, and you can also, again, you can measure it if you want to be very, very careful, but we're going to be adding so much material and stuff down here, the guard, the grip, eventually the pommel, probably adding hands over it, that you don't need to be terribly exact. Again, take away less material and then you can file later rather than taking more material and then having to add with green stuff or whatever else, right? So then trace this line, do some light multiple cuts to cut that out, okay? Okay, we can refine that with a little bit of file work. Okay, so now we have the blades. All right. We may have to split this into multiple videos, doing the guard in a week. So that gives you 2 weeks to build a blade, and then we'll move on to the pommel in the next video. Thanks so much, guys. Give that a try. And hope to see you in the next one.